Do you think the racism between the colors of skin was going on before Dr. King solved it?
I studied this a lot, and it's a very deep thing that has to do with light and dark. You know, not the color of your skin.
The history of racism, I couldn't begin to say what that is, but you know, when we started to bring slaves to this country and buy them and sell them like property and disrupt their families and not educate them and all that stuff, then they were creating this second class of citizens, and that's racism. Then even after the Civil War, when they were emancipated, it was still racism because they were still treated very, very, very badly. And it really took the Civil Rights Movement, so you're talking, you know, 200 or 300 years of racism.
Why did it get involved with the Civil Rights Movement?
When I first got interested in the Civil Rights Movement, which it kind of came along. And I think the reason it was so compelling to me was that when I was your guys' age, my mom was sick and really couldn't take care of me and my brothers very well. So we had a black woman come in to take care of us. And she was like my second mother. I adored her, and she adored me. And she took care of us like every day, and she cooked dinner, and she, you know, took care of us, and she was really, really wonderful. And I grew up in Oklahoma, which is not really the deep South like the Confederacy, like in the Civil War, but it was very segregated. And when Sarah and I would go out somewhere, we couldn't go someplace and get a bite to eat because she wouldn't be allowed in any place that I could go, because blacks were not allowed into, you know, a regular restaurant. They had their own places that they had to go. But we would go some places in public, and I remember just a couple of incidents. One where we were both thirsty, so we went up to get a drink of water, and there were these two water fountains next to each other, and one said white and one said colored. Yeah, exactly, like, ew, what's that? And I remember thinking, I mean, I was a little kid, I was like, why do we have to drink out of different water fountains? Why can't I drink out of your water fountain? And she was just, no, don't just do it, just don't, you know, she wouldn't have said anything. No one would think to question that back at that time. And another time I had to go to the bathroom, and there was a bathroom for white and a bathroom for colored. That was the label. It didn't say black or African American, it said colored. And she couldn't come in with me to the white bathroom, and she said, go ahead in, and I did. But I remember that thinking so strongly at that time, like, she's my family member. What is this? What's with this? It doesn't make sense. And then, so when I was 17, 18 years old, and the Civil Rights Movement came along, and people started saying, why aren't people equal? Why aren't black people and white people together and equal? And, you know, it really, I think, touched a chord in me that was maybe more than just political or whatever, but it really meant something to me personally, even though I wasn't in touch with Sarah at that time anymore. But so that's kind of the story of how I think I was, you know, my heart was in the Civil Rights Movement.
I was there when all the riots were taking place, and the kids at Trinity got all excited. Trinity was one of the first schools that had what they called a sit-in. They trapped the bosses of the school in a room and said, you can't come out until you tell us you're going to get more black people. And actually, on that exact meeting, they had hired somebody to go get more black students. The students went to a neighborhood that was all black people, and they set up programs. They called themselves the Odd Squad, O-D-D, Odd Squad. And they set up programs for the kids, and they did all sorts of stuff. I mean, it was very, very outreach, you know, and schools got behind it, and so we're really working hard now in a lot of ways to reach out to what's going to be the majority of the population. Europeans will be a minority.
What would happen if a white doctor took care of a black patient? Would he still treat them?
And if a white person went to a black doctor, it's funny, it worked in a different way. When I was coming to Connecticut, just before I was coming to Connecticut, I was having trouble with my glasses. And I tried to get an appointment before I left my graduate school to come to Connecticut to work. And I called and I couldn't get an appointment, so I went to the school nurse. And I said, gee, you know, is there any way you can find somebody who will see me? And she said, Yeah, there is a doctor you can see, but I don't know whether you'll want to go. I said, well, is he an eye doctor? He said, yeah. I said, I need my glasses. What's the trouble? And they said, well, he's a Negro. And the question wasn't so much, but the question was, you know, white patient, white doctor treating a black person, is would a white person go to a black doctor? And so you know what I said? I said, well, does he have a doctor's degree? And he said, well, of course he does. I said, well, then make me an appointment. You know, if he's got a degree, I don't care what his skin color is, I needed somebody who could make
What did it feel like to be alive during the civil rights movement?
The places that were just for blacks were always worse. They were always dirtier, they were always less money and effort was put into them, they were always just inferior in every way. And that's really the attitude that we grew up with, was that black people are second-class citizens. That's just the way it is.
Why do you think those whites at the speech, why do you think they went?
I think because of what Martin Luther King said. I think it was clear that this was unjust. It was wrong. And it didn't matter, but it's not just like, well, I'm black and I'm being oppressed, so I want to fight against it. But it's like you see something wrong happening and you want to do something about it. You know, even if it's not your skin color or your gender or your whatever.
Did black and white people have to go to different buildings to shop?
I was a young man. It depended on where you lived. And when you visited the South, which was maybe south of Pennsylvania, there weren't so much different buildings to shop in. There were different bathrooms and there were different public water fountains and things like that. And it was the same, although there was a lady who owned a big store called G. Fox, and she was one of the very earliest person who hired black people to serve behind the counter. Because when I was your age, there were no black people on the floor behind the counter.
Did you stand up for other people in the civil rights movement?
At a roller skating rink in town, and it was segregated. They wouldn't let blacks in. So we had a black friend. There weren't a lot of blacks that went to my college, but we had one black friend named Curtis, and we thought we're going to integrate the skating rink. So we would go to the skating rink, and there would be like 10 white ones, 10 of us in front, and then Curtis was in back. And we would go and pay our money and get our ticket, and the guy would give us our roller skates and blah, 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 and we'd put on our roller skates, and he would do that for all 9 of us, and then he would get to Curtis, and he'd say, Curtis, you can't come in, you're black. And we would say, oh, if Curtis can't come, we're not skating. Take off our shoes, take off our skates, return the, it was a big hassle for the guy. He really didn't like that. After we did that about 10 times, he saw us coming, and we went through all this, we got our skates in, and then he let Curtis in. So Curtis got his skates on, and Curtis did. Turns out Curtis didn't know how to skate any more than the man in the moon. He was falling on his butt. It was hilarious. We're like, Curtis, why did we let you in here? You can't even skate. But that's how we integrated a skating rink. But that was kind of passive resistance because we didn't do anything illegal. We didn't attack the guy. We didn't say anything to him. We just made his life so miserable, spending a half an hour checking us all in and out, that he finally gave up and said, you know, the black kid can come in.
There was a girl in my school one time, and she was colored, and someone was making fun of her. These kids ganged up and told him he was wrong and everything, and he never bothered anyone again.
That's great.
Did black and white people ever get different punishment?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question in the world about that. This is just a matter of scientific study. If you go and look at the sentences that courts give people for the same offense, black people are punished much more. And if you go to the worst punishment, which is the death penalty, black people are, gee, I don't remember, but it's a big percentage. There may be African blacks are something like 15 to 19% of the population, and there's something like 70 to 80% of the people who are executed. So there's no question about that. And you know, once again, you have a situation where we're we're supposed to have laws that don't pay any attention to whether you're rich or poor, or black or white.
Did you ever hear Martin Luther King Jr. dream speech?
Everybody I knew was in the civil rights movement. We were all, and a whole bunch of people wanted to go. And they got buses, and it was actually the biggest march like that had ever happened in Washington, D.C. It was 250,000 people, which I think has been matched since then, but that was unbelievably huge. So when you looked on, and it was on television, because we had television at that point, which we really hadn't had before the 1950s. And from the Washington Monument, I mean, you would just see a wall of people. It was just people as far as the eye could see. It was really an amazing experience.
What was the speech like? Did you agree with him?
The program was all day long. It wasn't just Martin Luther King speaking. He was one of many speakers. And they had a lot of singers and songs, and they had actors. You'd really be straining your ears to hear every word, but then you'd also be cheering. You know, if people said something, you'd just be like, yay! You know, there'd be this outpouring of just cheering and everything. But it was really like everybody was together in this. There was an amazing feeling of just being together with his 250,000 people that you never even met. That we were all thinking the same thing, feeling the same thing, there for the same reason, and it was really something to be a part of.
How did you feel about Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech about peace?
You listened. He had this really huge, big voice, and he spoke slowly, and he was so unbelievably eloquent. And the hair would stand up on the back of your head. You were just like, oh my gosh. And he spoke for a long time. I actually copied out the speech, and the I Have a Dream part was toward the end, which I had not remembered. And I do remember sitting there, and he said, I have a dream. And then he started to say what the dream was. And then he said, I have a dream. He said it again. And then he said, I have a dream. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this guy's repeating himself. This is going to be terrible. You know, otherwise he's such a good speaker. And then he kept going, and I realized it was poetry. People were talking, people would really listen. I mean, it was quiet. You were focused on what was going on. People weren't there to have a picnic. This was, to be part of this movement was a very passionate, very, very important thing in my life and everyone's life who was there. People weren't there just to hang out or whatever.
What made you happy about the speech that Martin Luther King gave?
It's just wonderful speeches and music and comradeship. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy, which has engulfed the Negro community, that's even the word he used, must not lead us to a distrust of all white people, for many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone.
When you heard Martin Luther's speech, when you walked away, were you happy or sad?
At the end of the day, I don't think anybody went away from there saying, oh, that was the speech we're going to be talking about in 40 years. That's the speech. Martin Luther, we're going to have a Martin Luther King Day in the future. But I think the thing that stood out for me the most was that we had gotten that many people there, and that we were making that big an impact, and that these voices could no longer be ignored. You know, because we were really fighting. From where you are now, it's obvious that we would get civil rights and that this would all be resolved. At the time, it wasn't so clear. This was the biggest protest that had ever happened. And we were waiting to see, you know, is the president going to listen? Is Congress going to listen? What's going to happen? Is something going to come out of that? So just the fact that there were that many people, and it was that big a protest, and it was that powerful a day, that was the main thing for me. Marching together with people, you know, side by side, black and white together, that was just amazing. It was just amazing.
Do you think Martin Luther King had a hard time making speeches when people disagreed with him?
He had a lot of death threats. A lot of people wanted him dead. And a lot of people in the police department wanted him dead. And a lot of people in the government wanted him dead. They wanted to silence his voice. And even though he was kind of protected by the police being there, they weren't that protected.
How did this speech inspire you?
Got you to think about people who are being treated differently, people who are being treated unfairly, people who are being treated badly, people you may know, played with kids or something, and all of a sudden they have to go somewhere else and you have to go over here. Well, what's that all about? But unless somebody really made you think and question, it just wasn't, you just don't think about it. It's just the way it was.
Did you ever meet Martin Luther King?
See him from where I was sitting, and I maybe somebody had binoculars or something. You could see him, and he was a very recognizable figure also at that time, but I never got close to him or met him. Somebody said you're going to meet him. Oh, well, that would have been wonderful, but no, you just saw him at a distance, and he was, you see other people way, way, way up on the stage, and I was maybe 3/4 of the way back.
When you heard Martin Luther King speak, what did you think he was like?
I forget in what order he spoke, and I remember just sitting up on a hill, just surrounded by my friends, they're all sitting on blankets and stuff, and this guy started to speak. And he had this power.
Was it like in Durham and Middlefield after Martin Luther King's speech?
I didn't live here. In the city where I was, up in Hartford, that speech was a kind of a rallying point, and it helped to define a way out of the anger. See, the real problem was once the blacks felt that they could express themselves, they expressed themselves very angrily. And Martin Luther King was a person who was publicly advocating a peaceful process, don't burn things down.
Did Martin Luther King ever go somewhere else than America to spread his dream?
Not really. He gave credit for the stance that he took to another person who was older than he was, whose name was Mahatma Gandhi. And there was the same kind of problem in India in the 1930s and 1940s, and Mahatma Gandhi was the same kind of man, and he wanted to do it without fighting. So he was a pacifist too. King was very clear that his model was Gandhi, and so he was writing on the ideas of Gandhi, and when he won the Nobel Prize, he was a national figure. But the problem he was looking at, just like Gandhi was looking at the problem in India, the problem he was looking at was here in the United States, and he didn't try to insert himself into the business of some other country, except on the very broadest level.
How did you feel after Martin Luther King Jr. died?
I was in the middle of a very active group, and I was on a college campus, and it was the same as if somebody had shot my grandfather. I mean, people were they responded, my friends responded like it was their best friend had been killed.
When he died, how did you feel?
Horrible. Horrible. Devastated. It was the front page of the paper, and people just stopped in the street and were just saying, oh my God, did you hear? It was heartbreaking. It was, how could this happen? How could this person who was so, I'm going to cry, I mean, so magnificent just be killed, just destroyed, just taken out of, it was just unbelievable. I think we were all just devastated for days, and we just didn't know what to do.
Did you ever stand up for yourself?
The other thing that you should know, Martin Luther King was a pacifist. He believed in nonviolent protest. So all of the protesting was done, you didn't exercise violence, you didn't attack anyone, you carried a stick with a poster on it that said, equality for blacks and whites, or whatever your poster said, but people attacked us, but we were completely nonviolent, and that was his message.
I kept drinking out of the black water fountain just to show how I was special. But even where I lived, which was Rochester, New York, which is in the north, black people couldn't go to the hotels in town.
Did white people get along with black people during the 60s?
Black people, colored people, lived in a whole separate part of town. There wasn't integration in housing or anything else. They lived in their own part of town, and that's just the way it was. And if they wanted to go somewhere, they'd take the bus.
Your babysitter Sarah, since she was colored, could come into the white community even though she wasn't white.
Because she was a maid. Because she was an inferior person. That's why. People who waited on white people, okay, like a waiter or a street sweeper or a janitor or a maid could come into the white part of town because it was known that they had a job there. Could they come and just walk around and do whatever they wanted? Not really. They might not be arrested, but they would not get much of a welcome.
I was in a place where there were a lot more black people, but I never saw them. It was very, very segregated. The black people lived in one place, and one year when I was in the Boy Scouts, we bought some turkeys and we were driven to the black people's place to give them turkeys, and I thought they were going to be so happy because I was bringing them food, and they didn't seem to be very happy, and it was the first time I realized that, you know, they were in this little special part of town, and they weren't particularly happy. They weren't angry, and they didn't yell at me. As the movement began, that was late 1940s and 1950s. When the movement began, by 1965, when a lot of things happened to try to get blacks and whites to meet, it really blew up, and fires were set in cities. There were riots. I lived in Hartford. I taught at Trinity College, and I lived in Hartford. And 3 blocks from where I lived, there was a huge mass of people came up the street and were met by policemen, and then there was a curfew. If you can imagine, a curfew. And I went out to my street in the center of Hartford, which was a busy street, just for fun. The curfew was at 8 o'clock. I went out at 8:30 in the summer evening and laid down in the street, just to show that there weren't any cars.
Do you think we are doing a good job preventing racism?
I think it's good to know the history of racism and to recognize that even though you may feel like you don't have any racist ideas, to realize that maybe you do sometimes, and maybe other people do, and just to be as aware as you can of that people are different and equal, and if you see something, say something about it. If you see something that's not right, say something about it. Speak up.
The segregation hasn't been very successful. Although, as you just pointed out, you 3 here, you're pretty into
So you're talking, 200 or 300 years of racism. I mean, which makes the election of Obama just unbelievable. Amazing, amazing, amazing. I remember when he was elected, of course I was for him, and a lot of my friends, we were thinking, yeah, everybody says they're going to vote for Obama, but when the time comes and you're in the voting booth all by yourself, are you going to really press the button for the black guy? And people did. And when he was elected, I just burst into tears. I couldn't believe this country had done this, 50 years after what we had experienced in the civil rights movement. It was quite something. So.
The movement worked. Well, it's worked in some ways. I mean, we have a black president. We've got a black person on the Supreme Court. We've got black college professors. When I went to school in college, I think in my class of 300 students, we only had 3 black people. My school this year, my college school this year, 35% of the entering class was non-white. They weren't all black, but they were non-white. So colleges have worked hard. Political things have worked hard.
Because everybody has colored skin.
That's what we used to say. What color do you mean? Green? Polka dot? Why don't you be specific? If you want to have colored, we would finally question, what do you mean colored? Everybody's colored. I have a tan, am I colored? But I think what's hard to grasp in 2011 is how much that was just part of the way it was back when you were saying, kids don't see color. I'm like, I never thought this day would come. This is inconceivable that I'm a college student and we're marching and people are getting bashed over the head and beaten and not allowed to vote, and now it's like kids don't even see color. What's color? Why would you be concerned about that? They don't even grasp what it was like, which is great. It's the way it should be.